The news that Microsoft might buy Bitcoin has generated much fuzz among Bitcoin hodlers these days. Similarly, Microsoft, using its cash reserves to acquire Bitcoin, can help maintain Bitcoin's market dominance and protect Microsoft shareholders' future value. These positive discussions within Microsoft's board signifies a long-awaited acceptance of Bitcoin as a company's treasury diversification strategy. While many experts agree that Microsoft's finance team is unlikely to invest all its cash in Bitcoin at once, which could potentially impact Bitcoin prices, Microsoft could probably adopt a more gradual approach. Even if Microsoft were to use all its cash, $76 billion treasury, to acquire Bitcoin, the impact on the Bitcoin market would be less significant since Bitcoin price has risen much lately. From my in-depth research, I found this long-lost interview video by Peter McCormack's What Bitcoin Did podcast with Daniel Buchner, relating to Microsoft's Bitcoin strategy. He is now head of Block's Bitcoin Decentralized Identity program. Let's now get straight into this and explore the real reason for why Microsoft might tap into the Bitcoin network in the near future. Who is Daniel Buchner? A prominent speaker at Consensus 2024 conference. Why do I find this interview very interesting and credible in relation to Microsoft news?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at Microsoft, I work on decentralized identity. That's, a subset of identity where, people should be in control of, all aspects of that, which is like their identifiers, their data. That work started a while back at Microsoft. I'd worked at Microsoft, in the earlier years when, before Google Chrome was around, we kind of believed in their ethos of, free and open web. And throughout working, in my position in Mozilla, I sort of fell in love with the idea of decentralizing both identity and applications. And it was something that I started working on there and actually got the ability to transition over to Microsoft and work on it full time. So that was sort of the tale of that.
Let's listen further on this interview with Peter McCormack 4 years ago, discussing Microsoft's Decentralized Identity Management Program.
Where are we in the world of identity now? Because I myself have got various identities online. I have a Facebook identity and a LinkedIn identity and a Google identity. And now I've got an Apple identity, which seems to be slightly better than the previous I've just suggested. So where is the world of identity now and where is it headed?
Yeah, I think right now, we've had the same identity systems really for quite a while in terms of consumers, right? We've had OAuth, we've had, social logins, that sort of thing for a while. And it's I wouldn't say stagnated completely, but it hasn't changed very much. A few providers of identity really are who you get your digital IDs from that you log into all your applications and services online. And those IDs are primarily just, they're leased to you, whether it's an email address or, some other form of authentication like an app's username. Even your Twitter handle, for instance, as we know, is certainly leased to you. And these are identifiers that can be taken from you at any time for any number of reasons, whether it be, a social provider doesn't like what you wrote and you're suspended or it's removed, or, maybe a company just goes out of business. There's been email addresses for various companies that just, they go out of business and you're done. And if you don't get your stuff off there in time, you lose access to things. And that's, it's all well and good while your identifiers are tied to things like, your cat pictures that you want to post to Facebook and everything. It's all fun and games until someone says, well, we're moving everything to a digital world, which we will, just like, we don't have paper email, we have email now. And when those things happen, proofs like, do you own your car, the deed to your house, all that stuff. When that starts getting digitized and tied to some identifier, man, you really better be an identifier that can't be taken from you at a whim by either a company or some bad actor, because that would be pretty scary in my opinion.
What happens when you get banned from Facebook or Twitter, Instagram or YouTube, for example?
Yeah, that's the reality today, right? They're going to cut you off from these systems, and they've done it in the past. There's people who we know who have disappeared from Twitter altogether from this, and they just they make up the rules as they go along, and sometimes they're applied unevenly and unfairly. And I just don't think that we should have anyone really in control of people's digital self. We should be in control of that. So I think the model should change to be something where you own your identifier. Let's just think about it as a Twitter handle, even though it's not a friendly little name like that in technical speak. Just think about it like that, like a handle. You should own that handle. And if you want to happen to log into Twitter as an application or, Facebook as an application, sure, they can curate messages that you happen to post with that application, but they can't cut your ID off from existing in the world. All the connections you've made and friends you have, those connections shouldn't be severed from you. And I would actually even go so far as to argue, though, in the long term, that even your social posts and things you do actually should be your own. And those apps should more or less be a reflection of what you post yourself and data you retain.
So how can this identity, censorship, and other problems be prevented? Big tech companies nowadays has so much power, and they have taken hold of our identities without us knowing.
Really fundamentally, you're right. This is about decentralizing the web. And the only way to do it successfully is to decentralize sort of the original sin, which was the identity piece. We don't have any native identity today, just like we don't have any native digital currency, as Jack talks about, when it comes to Bitcoin. And those two things, primarily, more than anything else, will realize benefits in the decentralization of society that we have never seen. And it all starts sort of at the ID, right? Like if you don't own your ID in the world, nothing is really attributable to you. You can't really have a verified presence in the world. Like if you're getting scammers impersonating you all the time on all these channels, it's really hard. And you deserve to have that presence in the digital world, just like you are a person in the real world.
Well, yeah, I've got it with Instagram. I've got this same person every couple of weeks. They create a new account. They replicate all my posts. They then start following my friends and they try to sell them a Bitcoin mining operation. And they succeeded, at least one case I know. So my neighbor lives opposite me. He's a kid. I didn't even know he was listening to my podcast. He's 18 years old. And I bumped into him the other day because he goes running in the park. And I bumped into him, asked him how he was. He said, yeah. And he said, I've been listening to your podcast, blah, blah, blah. And he was a bit coy. And he said, yeah, I got scammed recently. I was like, oh, why? What happened? He said, somebody added me on Instagram. I thought it was you. And I was talking to you and I thought I was. And I paid £3,000 into a Bitcoin mining operation. And it was like, what?
Wow.
I mean, you're talking, what's that, like $4,000 nearly? And every single time I report them and they close it down, they come up with a new one. One time they actually banned me and let the scammer continue. And there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, can you believe that? They actually banned me. Which I had to then go through somebody I know at Facebook to speak to somebody at Instagram to get my account back. But I can't stop this. And I know it's not just happened to me. I think I saw either Cameron or Tyler Winklevoss say on Facebook the other day, he's going through exactly the same. And I'm guessing if I had a single identity attributable to me, people would be able to verify that themselves. And they would know.
Yeah, and even independently of any of these organizations, right? So even if they don't play ball, if you assert your identity and it's backed by strong cryptography, someone, browsing an application on the web could validate it themselves. And I think that's what we really want to empower people to do, is remove this pressure point from gatekeepers, because a lot of them are not even incentivized to care. I mean, unless you're at the highest levels, right? Unless you're like the president of some country or something, maybe they'll put a special task force on it to take care of it for them. But, there's no money in it in a lot of ways for many organizations. Now, for other organizations, and I'll give you a little clue about why Microsoft might be interested in all this, because it's not all, just about being a good person and doing the right thing. Think about things like LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn actually is about trust. Like LinkedIn is about, I browse someone's profile and I'm trying to find out what their resume is. And the whole point of looking at his resume, hopefully, is that this is relatively accurate information. So when people put up, scam type profiles, it hurts LinkedIn. I know this happened. My wife works at Yahoo, which is now Verizon. And a while back, I think they had a CEO that managed to get into the CEO position, and a good portion of his resume was completely fabricated. And they just took it at face value, I suppose. I mean, they didn't look into it. And this guy ends up leaving the company. He's a CEO of a major company. And this is hilarious. I mean, there's no reason why these things can't be validated and verifiable.
That's an amazing story.
What is Microsoft value for doing this? Prioritizing decentralized identity over centralized identity management.
I mean, there's a number of things, right? So there's a lot of things you just can't do in identity safely unless people own their own IDs. And there's actually some legal strictures to this, like in various locales. Public institutions are sort of prohibited, or it's very difficult to get them to assign digital proofs or digitize things to identifiers that are centralized. So, they can't sign moneyed special deals with, say, just LinkedIn or just any, email provider or something like that might have an OAuth integration. So it actually unlocks the ability to do a lot of different things, like do digital diplomas at scale, to do credentialing for skills and stuff like that at scale in a way that's also standardized. Like right now, it's just kind of like, people can issue these badges. There's different badge protocols, but it's pretty ad hoc. There's no real systemic way to find them and verify them. It's kind of a mess. So in order for us to unlock a ton of business opportunity in LinkedIn, in, areas, other investments we've made, things like GitHub and all these other things, you have to have users owning their own ID. It can't be a Microsoft-owned ID, or it's just not safe to do these certain use cases.
Let's get more technical on how Satoshi's Bitcoin vision can help with this.
I would actually harken back to what Satoshi first called Bitcoin before it was blockchain, which was time chain. Turns out that PKI, which is public key infrastructure, and that's like the thing that backs identifiers. So I'll give you an analogy of what one is today. An existing example is the DNS system. The identifier is a domain name, and then the backing, PKI data is your zone file in DNS that lists your name servers, routing information, and then there's certificate authorities that have the sort of backing cryptography. So that's an example of a PKI system. Every PKI system, if it isn't centralized, like a CI system where they just kind of decree that these are your certs, if you wanted to decentralize that, the most important piece is having a global, immutable, append-only log. Because everyone needs to see the state of some identifier. Like if Alice creates an ID and she initially associates, say, her phone that she has at the time with her ID and a public key on it, when she goes to get a new phone, she's going to switch that key out. And so everyone needs to be able to see that event globally and deterministically. Or else someone could masquerade as Alice. They could say, well, I have her old key, so I'm her, right? You have to have this sort of linear chronology of what happened when. It's a state machine. So what a blockchain does really elegantly that we've never had before is it's an oracle for entering events into a chronology. And that's exactly what we use it for. In its most primitive sense, we use Bitcoin to enter in events in a chronology that nodes sort of watch for and compute. And so they all can understand the state of every ID that's anchored in Bitcoin. So it's very important. So why would we pick Bitcoin versus some other blockchain like you first asked? Well, because we're not actually concerned with any of the super sexy smart contract or any interesting, I don't know, whatever you might call it, right? Not to say that there's less interesting stuff in Bitcoin, but we just don't care about features like that. That is not applicable for us. What we most care about is entering stuff in the most immutable, hardened record imaginable. And right now, that's Bitcoin. It's pretty hard to argue that isn't Bitcoin. So that's why we use it, is because it has those attributes and it suffices. It does exactly what we need it to do.
Okay, cool. How does it actually work in terms of me as an individual? Look, I'm a Bitcoiner, right? And I've got Bitcoin. Is it, I can have one ID per private key I have that can become an ID, so I can have multiple IDs?
Yeah, so you can actually have as many IDs as you want in the system. You can have thousands, for instance. We actually, there's this concept that we kind of play around with that is you're going to have probably a couple persona IDs, so like well-known persona IDs. And this is great for someone like you, right? You want a couple IDs in the world that people know are Peter. Like when Peter signs this with this ID, that's Peter. It's not anyone else. It's not any scammers or imposters. That's him. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of public stuff you'll tie to that, right? You might tie your resume, your podcasts, like signed statements you make, like public, things you say. That's all good. We all want that as, most users want that. And then you have a ton of identifiers, like maybe 99% of them that we call sort of like peer-wise or pair-wise identifiers, where you might meet someone or a company or an app you get engaged with, where you want to create an ID just for that connection. So that when you create the ID, it keeps that connection sort of siloed and private between you two so that you're not leaking information. So it's not just like one ID that signs everything and anytime you see any signature, you can like triangulate it back to you. What we're trying to do is section those relationships out so that you can keep them as private as you would like between you and your counterparties. And to answer your other question about, how many keys and stuff, DIDs, it's an international standard that's being finalized in the W3C. So this stuff is actually all built on standards. And DIDs are represented by this thing called a DID document, which is just a piece of metadata that contains key references and endpoints, so routing endpoints. You can have as many keys in that document as you want. You have, say, like a key that maps to your phone and your laptop and other devices you own, because that's the devices you're going to be using your ID with. And you can have a bunch of different keys. So it's not like Bitcoin addresses where there's like a key behind an address or even just multi-sig. It's a lot, you can have a lot more variety than that. And then you can also put endpoints that point to certain things. So you can have an endpoint that points to your Twitter profile, or you can have an endpoint that points to like a personal data store with encrypted data. And that's kind of the more future-looking stuff when we start getting into apps.
This is just the first cut of the interview. There are more coming. If you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and get notifications on our coming videos. Click the link below to hear the full version. Join us again next week as we continue this Bitcoin series.